dignitaries from the police. I can see Afande James Shemerewa is here. We also have Colonel Kalikona, the now head of the Directorate of Human Rights and Legal in the Uganda People's Defense Forces. So what we're going to do, I know Uganda is a religious country. We've recently allowed 70 people to attend Mass. And I believe we are 70 or less here. So I'll invite one of us to lead us in a short word of prayer. And then we'll do a quick round of introductions to understand who is in the hall. And then I'll run us through our agenda and we'll set the stage. Those who have not had breakfast, please feel free. The breakfast will run through the whole meeting. I'm told the English call this a breakfast meeting. So I'll invite my sister Rose Amongin to lead us in a short word of prayer. Rodney, please provide Rose a microphone. Please, let's maintain our face masks. Yeah, so we are going to have a short word of prayer before we start it off.
Let's pray. God Almighty Father, we want to thank you and appreciate you for the gift of life, the journey mercies, the protection. At this moment, we want to ask for your presence to guide us throughout these deliberations during the launch. As we launch this report, we pray that you keep us calm, peaceful, harmonious, and recognize each and everybody's presence here. I pray all this through the mighty name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior.
Thank you very much for that short, strong prayer. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions, and we'll start it from the back, the extreme back. You just mention your name and your organization. For those that are coming from up country, please indicate to us which region you're coming from. Let's make it brief.
Moses Wochaza from Human Rights Defenders Network, Busoga Sub-Region. I'm the focal person for Human Rights Defenders in the Busoga Sub-Region. You are welcome.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm called Dennis Odwar. I work for National Union for the Disabled Persons of Uganda as the manager for policy and rights. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Frederick Insibambi. I come from the Cross Culture Foundation of Uganda. Apologies for coming in a bit late.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emmanuel Elau. I'm one of the founders of Legal Hub Uganda. We're based in Kampala. Thank you.
Good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Businya Nuruddin from Smart Youth Network Initiative from Umbali.
Good morning. My name is Angela Tusime. I'm with the DGF.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm called Paul Orikushava. I work as the head of programs at the Lutheran World Federation, LWF.
Good morning. Sharon Akanwaj is my name. I'm the program manager for the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda. You're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Andrew Akutu is my name, and I work with the United Nations Human Rights in Kampala.
Good morning. My name is Amanjuru William Lesil. I work for Friends of Zoka. I come from Adjumani. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Among Rose. I work for Colliery Women Development Organization in Teso Sub-Region.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Winfred Mugambwa. I work with Radar Rights for Women, based in Kampala.
Good morning, everyone. I'm George Aguze from the Lutheran World Federation. I'm based in Kamwenge.
Good morning. Comfort Ikiri is my name. I work with RICE West Nile. RICE is Rural Initiative for Community Empowerment in West Nile sub-region. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Charles Donaldson Ogira, founder Youth Forum for Social Justice, a grassroots human rights defenders organization in Abim, Karamoja sub-region.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ogean Peter Bola. I work for Children of the World Foundation. In most common, people call it COW Foundation. We are based in Acholi sub-region.
Good morning. Flavia Namagembe is my name. I work with Youth Equality Center, Kampala. Thank you.
Good morning. Emmanuel Businga Puli is my name. I work with LWF Adjumani.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Akelo. I work with Lutheran World Federation at the head office in Kampala.
Good morning. My name is Tony Abed from Daily Monitor.
Good morning. I'm Nanyonga Nancy from the New Vision.
Good morning. I'm Prosech Sache from KFM.
Good morning. My name is Babidia Prosi. I work at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda. I'm in charge of capacity building. You're welcome.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Brigadier Rodney Edgar, and I also work with the coalition.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to tell us who they are? Yeah, feel free, would like to know you.
I wish you a good morning. My name is James Inkuvi. I'm a researcher with the Human Rights and Peace Center, School of Law, Macquarie University.
Good morning. I'm Lucy Peace Nantume. I work with the DGF, supporting partners implementing human rights programs.
Thank you, Lucy. You had the last laugh. So we are going to do a small thing. I'm going to invite my day's panelists to take their seats at the front. I will invite Nicole to take a seat first. Then I will invite Mr. Robert Kochani to take his seat. I'll invite Mr. Robert Chirenga to take his seat. I'm told the Lutheran LWF is represented. I also invite a representative from LWF to take his seat. We expect a representative from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but we can't wait. Government will find us on the way. There is already able representation from the UPDF and the UPF. So the government representative will find us on the way. Like I said, across last year, we did an assessment on the state's implementation of UPR recommendations. And our assessment was specific to recommendations that affect or impact the work of human rights defenders. The recommendations that we were following up on were recommendations that the state voluntarily accepted at Uganda's last review in 2016. My colleague James Nkubi will be taking us through highlights of that assessment. That assessment follows in-depth discussions and conversations with human rights defenders in the field who live on a day-to-day these realities, but also with key state agencies. And that's why you'll see that today we have representation from the UPDF and also representation from the UPF. We anticipate representation from the Ministry of Justice because it's a key actor in this process, but also the justice, law, and order sector. Like I said, we also anticipate representation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who really do a lot of work around charter-based procedures like a UPR. So without wasting much time, I'd like to invite Executive Director of the Coalition to officially to give his opening remarks, but also quite formally welcome you to this meeting. And then he'll also give us a highlight of where as a coalition we've been with the universal periodic process. Please join me to welcome Mr. Robert Chirenga.
Thank you, our Director of Ceremonies, Edward Silchacha. Our chief guest today, the country representative of the UN Human Rights Office, Uganda, representatives of the different development partners here today, representatives from the different state institutions, Government of the Republic of Uganda, the UPDF, the Uganda Police Force, the Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, representative from the Democratic Governance Facility, representative from international NGOs, representatives of the academia and the media, colleagues from civil society organizations and strategic partners represented here today. Good morning to you all. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this important activity where we launch our report on the Universal Periodic Review that speaks to human rights defenders. It equally gives me pleasure to be before you here today and to see a representation of human rights defenders from across Uganda. Between July and October 2019, the Coalition commissioned a study on an assessment of the state's implementation of recommendations that directly affect human rights defenders in Uganda. Our focus was on the midterm reporting, The charter-based mechanisms such as the Universal Periodic Review are a core component of our advocacy work at the Coalition. Today we are here to present to you the final findings. These findings are a result of in-depth discussions with human rights defenders from across Uganda and state actors. We are deeply grateful to the Democratic Governance Facility who, under the framework of an 18-month project known as Protection of Uganda Human Rights Defenders, supported this very activity. Distinguished guests, as I welcome you to today's report launch, we would like to express our appreciation towards the efforts of the government of the Republic of Uganda in passing progressive laws such as the Human Rights Enforcement Act of 2019. We look forward to having the Human Rights Defenders Bill equally passed into law and thereby improving on the environment in which human rights defenders operate. We are equally grateful to the pronunciations by the head of state and commander-in-chief towards those that abuse and violate citizen rights during these electoral campaigns that we are currently undertaking, which is highly applauded, and we hope to see practical action taken against such perpetrators. In spite of the above success stories, I would also like to reflect on the most recent events that have had some negative effects on the operating environment of human rights defenders. For example, human rights defenders continue to come under attack by some state and non-state actors by being subjected to harassment, trumped-up charges, intimidation, arbitrary arrests, and digital surveillance. This pattern is quite worrying, and more so during the electoral cycle. The NRM primaries presented some indications on how the electoral process is likely to form up if interventions are not made at an early point. Environmental rights defenders continue to come under pressure from state actors and non-state actors. In our recently held press conference on 15 September, we highlighted these deep-seated attacks targeting such human rights defenders. Mr. Amanzuru William is here with us today. Can he stand up for recognition? This was the human rights defender of the year 2019. He's here today and is one of those subjected to continuous attacks by state actors and specifically the office of the RDC Adjumani for merely exposing illegal logging in the districts of Moyo and Adjumani in an effort to save the environment. He heads an organization called Friends of Zoka. Zoka happens to be a forest within West Nile region, and their activities are aimed at protecting and preserving our environment. And we have illegal loggers who are supported by both state and non-state actors, and when he comes out to really expose them, then he receives reprisals. Why just the other day, the Uganda Communications Commission, the regulatory body, issued a notice requiring bloggers and other online users to pay a certain mandatory fee to publish their articles. The use of the law to interrogate unfairly permissible activities of human rights defenders or NGOs restricts the right of these same NGOs to assemble, associate, and express themselves. More so in the face of an election is a worrying trend in a democratic society. Distinguished guests, what this situation means or calls for is to undertake research, monitor, and document these events in order to produce credible reports that will ultimately enrich our evidence-based advocacy at whatever level, be it at a national, regional, or international level. Advocacy using charter-based mechanisms such as the United Nations Human Rights Council is critical, and civil society organizations have in the recent past actively participated. To this effect, we would like to express our appreciation and efforts towards the support by GIZ, Uganda office, in supporting this process in 2016. As stakeholders, we recognize that this process requires requisite preparations and coordination. Uganda last came up for review in 2016. Civil society organizations were hugely organized under the National Stakeholders Forum that brought together close to 300 national and grassroots NGOs. The forum was previously hosted by the Human Rights Network, a local NGO. As it stands today, HURINET is experiencing some organizational challenges that undermine its ability to push forward this critical process. Evident in our inability as CSOs to process a joint midterm report on the state's implementation of the UPR recommendations as accepted by the state of Uganda. The coalition sees this vacuum in CSO coordination, and the Secretariat is prepared and has the capacity to steer this process. Many actors have approached the coalition to temporarily fill this vacuum, and to this effect, we have organized a half-day dialogue on the 8th October 2020 to specifically address the critical question of coordination by bringing together all stakeholders within civil society and see whether we can come with a common position and consensus as to who should lead this coordination process. It is our sincere hope and prayer that by the end of the day, the CSO UPR Steering Committee will agree or generate consensus on a coordination entity towards a structured, inclusive, and robust CSO UPR shadow reporting framework. Colleagues and partners, I would like to thank you all of you, and more especially the Office of the United Nations Human Rights, for accepting our invitation to launch this report, and particularly supporting the national UPR process through engagement with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ugandan civil society organizations. I wish to thank you all once again, and I invite you to support the process around Uganda's Universal Periodic Review in 2021, which comes at a critical time as Uganda heads towards the polls. With these few remarks, I wish you fruitful and meaningful conversations today for God and my country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chilenga. I think he deserves another hand clap. Mr. Chilenga's remarks set the stage for our conversation. In 2016, we worked closely with the Lutheran World Federation. They supported some of the activities within the roadmap to Uganda's Universal Periodic Review. So I would like to invite the program manager of LWF to give us his remarks. You're welcome. Please welcome him.
The head of Democratic Governance Facility, the country representative, Office of the Human Rights High Commission, and all invited dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol is observed. It gives me great pleasure to make opening remarks at the launch of a report on the mid-term assessment of the state's progress in implementation of the UPR recommendations, which the state has assented to and agreed to undertake. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to represent the country representative of the Lutheran World Federation, Mr. Jesse Kamstra, who was unable to be here because he had to attend another urgent but equally important assignment. And so I bring to you his greetings and to let you know that he's part of this and he supports it. The main objectives of this meeting include dissemination of key findings on the mid-term assessment of the state's progress in implementation of UPR second cycle recommendations on human rights defenders, provide an opportunity to key state actors and all of us to interact with the findings and provide our perspectives. And it is also aimed at generating a debate on Uganda's forthcoming UPR and ESO processes. As you know, next year, we have a process to go through as we will be assessing the government's performance on all of the recommendations they accepted. Ladies and gentlemen,
I believe we all appreciate the uniqueness of the Universal Periodic Review as United Nations human rights mechanism. The UN Human Rights Council uses this mechanism to conduct a periodic review of the human rights record in all the 193 member states. The review and assessment are conducted every 5 years, as you all know. It is a voluntary process based on the cooperation and interactive dialogue, which gives the state under review the opportunity to show steps taken to improve its human rights record and to address the challenges encountered in the course of protection and promotion of human rights. We know many things happen, but people and all of us need assurance from the state that despite the conduct of some individuals, the state means well and is determined to address whatever has gone wrong. It is true that the UPR process gives every country an opportunity to strive to improve its human rights records. I therefore commend all of you, and indeed all of us, for the initiatives, the commitment, and the support in expanding the voices of all people in your respective jurisdictions on human rights and other human rights issues. Currently, LWF heads a refugee, asylum, and post-conflict communities cluster, which is part of the UPR, and works with all like-minded actors to monitor what the government is doing on its commitments. The cluster that LWF heads consists of 30 organizations, both local and international, with some of these organizations led by the refugees themselves, and sometimes founded by the refugees, and continues to jointly undertake advocacy and monitoring initiatives aimed at assessing and complementing the efforts of government of Uganda in implementing the UPR recommendations that affect refugees, asylum seekers, and post-conflict communities. Allow me to congratulate the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda upon this milestone of generating a UPR midterm report that evaluates the state's progress in implementing recommendations it voluntarily accepted years back. In conclusion, as LWF, we are committed to continue working closely with all stakeholders in regard to advocacy on implementation of the human rights recommendations accepted by this government. I thank you all for listening to me, for God and my country.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, and like Paul said, LWF leads a very big cluster on refugee rights. And not only do they lead the cluster, but they've also been supporting some of the activities and initiatives that lead to CSO participation in the UPR process. That's why you see they also have a huge representation here today from the grassroots, comrades from Kitgum and other districts. Allow me to invite Ms. Nicole, the head of facility DGF, to give her official opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Bierler. I recently joined the Democratic Governance Facility as its new head of facility, so it's an honor and pleasure to be here today. Your Excellencies, Ambassador Mugoya, or a representative from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for when they join us, Mr. Robert Kochani, country representative of the UN Human Rights Office, our colleagues from the ministries, departments and agencies, the Executive Director and staff of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders Uganda, all human rights defenders present here from across the country, those following us online, media representatives, all protocol observed, and very happy to be here, as I said. On behalf of the DGF, I congratulate the team of the National Coalition for organizing today's event. I bring you greetings from the 7 development partners that form the DGF. So as most of you will know, these are Austria, Denmark, Ireland, European Union, Norway, Netherlands, and Sweden. So as the DGF, our vision is a Uganda where citizens are empowered to engage in democratic governance and the state upholds citizens' rights. DGF is proud to support state and non-state partners who are engaging in efforts aimed at 4 high-level outcomes. 1, strengthen democratic processes that respond to citizens' rights. 2, strengthen rule of law and improved access to justice. 3, increase protection and fulfillment of human rights and gender equality. And 4, improved citizens' inclusion and engagement in decision-making processes. So our partners are implementing activities across the whole range of these different issues and across the country, and are doing really tremendous work. And I'm very pleased to see many of the partners in this room today. Ladies and gentlemen, as also recognized in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and more specifically in Goal 16, Indicator 10, human rights defenders play a key role in advancing the development of our societies, including, of course, promotion of human rights and gender equality. Human rights defenders like yourselves here in this room engage in efforts to strengthen legal and policy frameworks. You seek to advance the effective implementation of these frameworks. You assist people in seeking justice and claiming their rights. You engage with ministries, departments, and agencies in seeking to improve the situation overall, including by bringing attention to those areas that have some room for improvement, and you make concrete recommendations on how to address these issues. So DGF is really honored to support human rights defender organizations and entities with a clear mandate to protect human rights defenders. And this includes Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Center of Uganda, the Human Rights Network of Journalists, and of course our host today, the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. So ladies and gentlemen, today's event will allow us to take stock of the recommendations issued under the UPR mechanism, specifically on human rights defenders here in Uganda. So we've heard already about the UPR process, how it works, that it's meeting every 5 years, or like every country is considered every 5 years, and that there's a range of information that is considered in this process. State information, information from national human rights institutions, civil society organizations, and the UN system. I'm sure we will hear about that in a moment. On a side note, I was actually in Geneva when the Human Rights Council created the UPR. So I was part of the Austrian delegation. We were negotiating the framework of the UPR. We didn't really know how it would work in practice, if it would actually pick up, because it's a voluntary process, if member states would engage. And here we are, several years later, and we see there's interest in this, and it's a very useful mechanism to bring out issues and to identify ways forward on addressing some of the challenges. So as you know, Uganda has been reviewed twice, in 2011 and 2016. And as we heard, Uganda has accepted a number of recommendations made by fellow states. Uganda is expected to advance on the implementation of these recommendations ahead of the next review, as we know, next year in October, November 2021. So while the first two cycles really brought out the issues, the third cycle focuses on implementation of those recommendations. So Uganda will be receiving a lot of questions to what degree it has implemented the recommendations from previous cycles. Oops, sorry. So the UPR process provides a very valuable opportunity for states to reflect on the human rights situation, on the recommendations it has received, and it provides an opportunity to engage with a wide range of stakeholders to see what can be done to advance on these recommendations. So today's meeting really provides such an important opportunity to reflect, as we know, specifically on the recommendations on human rights defenders. And I appreciate the presence here of some of our MDAs and also of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, hopefully later, as they are the ones who will be representing Uganda in Geneva during the review. And I really appreciate the efforts in seeking to coordinate the reflections on where we are at with the recommendations under the leadership of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. So we're looking forward to hearing about the outcome of the review. And I appreciate the presence of the civil society colleagues here in this room today and online. Your assessment is an essential component in this process. And by joining your voices, your messages will be more clearly heard. In particular also in Geneva, where the dialogue will happen. So it would be really good to see more efforts to coordinate the civil society assessment, also under other clusters, to bring out your joint shared assessment. And having worked as a delegate in Geneva, I can attest to the value of having actually these joint pieces of information, because you're flooded with information, you get so many different documents, and if you see that there's a document that is actually shared by a number of civil society organizations, you know that there's a lot of thought that has gone into that, and you know that you can rely on the information shared therein. So as DGF, we stand ready to assist and support civil society organizations and other partners as you seek to engage in preparations for the UPR. So in closing, let me again thank the National Coalition for Human Rights Defenders Uganda for today's event and for all you do in support of human rights defenders in Uganda. We look forward to the launch of the report and the deliberations here today. And I'm sure this conversation will further contribute to, and again quote DGF's vision, a Uganda in which citizens are empowered to engage in democratic governance and where the state upholds citizens' rights. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I think she deserves another hand clap. Yeah, the DGF has played a critical role previously, and we are really looking to them to support the process going forward. I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Rose Karugonja. She's the chair of the Leadership Tribunal. You're most welcome. I would like us now to move to presentation of the findings. Rodney, are we ready? Rodney. So I'd like to invite James Nkubi. James Nkubi, for those that know him, he has a lot of experience in the UPR process. In fact, in 2016, he supported the coordination of this process on behalf of the National Stakeholders Forum on the UPR. So not only is he presenting this report, but also he's coming with a lot of expertise that we are able to tap in as we roll out the CSO process for 2021. James Nkubi, you're most welcome to make the presentation. Please give him some energy.
Good morning once again. It's a great joy to be here discussing UPR again. Familiar faces we were with in the struggle that time. And I'm glad that the coalition is picking up from where we left off, because we really put in a lot then. We wouldn't want that process to die off. At that time, much as Edward has said, it was me, but I had a very second-in-command lady who did a great piece of work, and I'm glad she's here to give further strength to the process. Jacqueline, we used to work with her. Kindly stand up, Jacqueline. She was my deputy then, so you are in good hands. And because the process must go forward, we commit to help in whichever way that we can help. I also want to thank the coalition for giving me the opportunity to share the little that I know about this process, particularly in digging deep into the midterm assessment. I'm glad that the fact that UGANDA'S review was extended to next year, we are not fatally out of time in this entire process to do at least a semblance of an assessment in terms of midterm. I'll be very fast and pretty brief for purposes of time, and you'll allow me to go nearby there and I control the machine myself such that we are faster. I also want to recognize James. They have been very great comrades in this struggle over the recommendations, particularly to police. We thank you. And of course, many of us have drunk from the wealth of knowledge from Dr. Rose Karugonjo, much as she moved yonder to greater heights. Hopefully she will come for us and we'll be there in glory. But she was a very, very great pillar in this process. Let me kindly move quickly there to the presentation. And of course, Nicole, in a different capacity. Yes. Since I'm far, I think I have the liberty now to do some bit of a bridge, 4 meters. We did this assessment last year, actually, or thereabout, and we were, as Edward said, we were looking at the that were not necessarily direct, but had an impact on the HRADs. So briefly, what I'm going to do. Yeah, that's how I do it, huh? Okay. So it doesn't flow. Okay. So we want to look at the objectives of the study quickly, the methodology that we used then, and then the scope that we used in terms of geography and topical. And then, of course, the assessment matrix that we took on because we wanted to be empirical as possible. And then, of course, the appreciation of the human rights defenders in this context. Who was the human rights defender that we were looking at in particular? And then, of course, lastly, we made the assessment and made the necessary recommendations. The objectives of the study were, one, to look into the state of progress of implementation of the second cycle. We were particularly looking at the second cycle of Uganda, particularly focusing on HRDs. And then secondly, we wanted to assess the emerging challenges that the government of Uganda faces in implementation. When we were doing UPR2, the idea was that we should not blast, but it is possible that there are challenges that the government goes through that are pertinent for discussion and potentially even where civil society can make a contribution. So we wanted also to find out the challenges, whether there is a lacuna that civil society can actually come in to help. And then we wanted to propose evidence-based alternatives or recommendations on how the challenges of the implementation that the study reveals can be mitigated, such that the pending implementations, especially those coming in the second, third cycle, can be dealt with. In terms of methodology, we went for both quantitative and qualitative literature review, but also we're interested in terms of the literature into the design and the choice of engagement. We did a baseline survey to find out how thus far some of the recommendations had come into play. But beyond even the literature review that was scholarly based, we also went into the government agencies. The government had also made some reports. We were lucky then that we were still members of some of these entities of government where I would meet some of these officials and have a discussion on these issues. We also did field work. Some of you, we discussed with you in the field. Some of you, we discussed on phone due to your busy schedules. But at least this report was informed with lived realities of people that are considered HRDs in terms of conceptualization. The fieldwork was deemed necessary because we wanted to go yonder than probably what we hear in the news, but also to relate with the HRDs on their daily lives. So there are connotations of lived realities or of voices of people and how they understand or how they have been affected by some of these recommendations. For the purposes of this report, the stakeholders we shall keep referring to are those individuals or groups of individuals or organizations that affect and or could be affected either positively or negatively by the implementation of the recommendations by Uganda. We did some key interviews in Wakiso, in Kampala, in Gulu district, particularly for the Acholi sub-region, in Hoima district, the Albertine, and in Mbale, the Elgon region. Of course, some of the recommendations that came had a particular regional specific approach, which I see that the coalition is maintaining in terms of who has come here. Some of the comrades were with then are here, and it gives me great joy that we are demystifying this UPR beyond the Kampala agenda to a national character. And we have a list of people we dwelt on or with, the members of the HRD fraternity, and we tucked it away for purposes of safety and security to avoid reprisals, especially when it comes to the oil region. Geographically, we went for national scope, albeit with the representation from the regions, and then particularly in terms of scope in subject, the inquiry targeted recommendations that affect HRDs, specifically targeting HRDs as such. So we didn't go into the other dynamics. Now, the recommendations that directly affect HRDs, we isolated these as those that have been expressly hinted on or even said out by the recommending states expressly. And then those that indirectly affect HRDs, we picked a few under the argument that their implementation or non-implementation will affect the environment of the HRDs. We thought it was going to be naive of us to look at only those affecting HRDs directly when actually they are so minimal and probably with limited impacts, yet there are those that have an intersectionality with them that could be of great use and consideration. Whereas we primarily focused on accepted recommendations, we cast the net wider to noted recommendations. Why? The noted recommendations at the time, and when we used to sit in the interministerial committee meetings, I was representing civil society there. I am, because I've not been dethroned until you set up, Mr. Chirenga, you set up the process quickly, and I hand over. I still sit in those committees because it's me they know. So they keep calling me. I keep on passing on information to comrades. The ball is at you guys. So when we were sitting there, there was a semblance of thought within the representatives of the MDAs that much as they had made notes or noted some recommendations that you discover it was just a problem of language, but in principle, they would agree with what had been recommended. So with that knowledge at the back of our minds, we went full swing into those that were noted, arguing that they had a synergy with the accepted ones. And then we note in this study, and it will emerge when you're reading it, the peculiarity and the diversity of the stakeholders therein. In this particular agenda, the stakeholders were not homogeneous. The denominator was all of them were HRDs, but not all of them were homogeneous. This is in light of the fact that some people are HRDs in civil and political rights, that even in government there are HRDs, as we shall later see, some are in media, some are in LGBTI, basically a diversity of these stakeholders. So the denominator we were following was the HRDs, as long as you were there. We also had cross-cutting issues. We looked at gender dynamics in contemporary Uganda, and how they relate to the implementation of the recommendations, or how the non-implementation of these recommendations affect particularly, or has a connotation on gender. We also had an issue concerning politicization, and we were alive to that, human rights abuses versus protection. We went somewhat with caution into what we call the intricate cobweb of patronage and neo-patrimonial politics, how it affects the implementation of these recommendations. But we were largely guided by one wider question of how rational and equitable or maintainable are the various practices the government has employed in implementing the recommendations. So our assessment matrix was simple. Not implemented indicates a particular recommendation, which upon research and finding information to the contrary, we made a conclusion that it had not been implemented at all. Implemented indicates the recommendation based on evidence gathered that it has been implemented to completion. And then some of you are wondering, what have they given him? Guy is slowing down. They've given it to me, not you. Partially implemented connotes and appreciates government progression at implementation, at least to a particular verifiable extent, but not completion. We wanted to trace the progression. And then we came up in the matrix of challenges. At every analysis of a recommendation, also having COVID issues. At every analysis of a recommendation, if challenges of implementation were professed and verified by respondents, we recorded them. Again, the idea behind was, as we ran UPR 2016, we ran it on the defenders, publicly support their work and provide protection for them. It was three-tiered. Recognize the legitimacy, in essence that they are legitimate entities. Number two, after recognizing that, okay, publicly support their work. Okay, publicly support their work. And after supporting their work publicly, protect them in case need be. That was Uruguay. Ireland gave us a recommendation that ensure that civil society organizations and human rights defenders can operate in a safe environment, and that all allegations of intimidation, harassment, and violence are fully investigated. Two duties to the state: the duty to protect, the duty to promote. Okay, that was from Ireland. From Ghana, the recommendation one: investigate the alleged harassment of human rights defenders and prosecute offenders. Okay, and then Uruguay again: thoroughly investigate the threats against human rights defenders and civil society organizations, bring to justice those responsible, and guarantee reparations to the victims, especially those working for women's rights. And that explains why we had to take the gender aspects. And of course, Uruguay went beyond and was even seeking compensation for the people whose rights have been dealt with. Now, when we come to the legitimacy question, of course, you'll discover that the thread was so much about stop the harassment, the intimidation, investigate, punish perpetrators. But Uruguay was very interesting, their recommendation, extremely interesting. And we dwelt on it quite a lot. Explicitly recognize the legitimacy of the work carried out by HRDs, and after that, support them publicly, and after that, make sure that you protect them. Now, we found very interesting findings when it comes to legitimacy. I'm now beginning the parts of it. The legitimacy question: the closest the legitimacy the government has provided to HRDs in our findings was largely implicit and scattered. In essence, there is no express association of HRDs with the government, by the government, but rather you'll find it implicitly, and scattered over different ministries. Other MDAs have, however, been overt in explicitly recognizing the work of HRDs. This includes the Uganda Human Rights Commission. It even adopted in its text for the now almost 7th year or so the word human rights defenders. And the Uganda Equal Opportunities Commission as well. It has been very expressly recognizing the HRDs and their works. So these are the two entities in this government so far that have been very emphatic in expressly coming out and connoting that human rights defenders do exist, and we recognize the work that they are doing. Then the closest, Now, we also found some snippets of implicit legitimacy being bestowed on HRDs in what first we called civil society attendance and organization. In this context, we are looking at implicit recognition that arises in a situation where the government was extending a leaf and allowing civil society to co-organize with them particular activities. And this came out very clearly in some of the works that were going on when it came to the, remember the time when the organizations were re-registering, the NGO Bureau restructuring and coming up with a new mechanism of re-registering organization. There was a lot of cooperative, coordinating activity between the government and CSOs or HRDs. In our findings, we discovered that such meetings established and maintained consistently point to the recognition of the legitimate work that HRDs do in their various spheres in the country complementing the government. Those of you who have been party to this NGO discourse, the Act and so forth, you know that we were frequenting a lot the Minister of Internal Affairs, including meeting the Minister and having a conversation on the same. So we thought that that's very key in terms of recognizing legitimacy. Okay. The other point was on what I called, or what we called, the ascendance of civil society organizations and NGOs on various government bodies that hitherto only were reserved for ministries, departments, and agencies. I can give you an example of how JELOS has been extended. Some of you here sit with me on the JELOS working group on human rights and accountability in the country. Again, some of you here, we sit together on the subcommittee of human rights under the working group on human rights and accountability in JELOS. Almost every year, every month, we have meetings to discuss human rights in the country. Some of you sit on the accountability group or working group and so forth. So we thought that these platforms, which were not actually, were go and no-go zone for civil society, once they are opened up in the extent to which they have been opened up and we have access to every document, then we thought that that is a very progressive move. We have been sitting in some of those committees here with James from police and then the military as well. The spokesperson has been very key on the same. When we move on, I was explaining this. Actually, on those committees is AISA, FHRI, ACTV, NUDIPU, WONET, Human Rights Center, among others that sit there. There's also the Interministerial Committee on the UPR, the National Action Plan on Human Rights. The National Action Plan on Human Rights, incidentally, one of the authors is here with us, Dr. Rose. This committee was set up by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Initially, it was supposed to be a committee for ministries, departments, and agencies of government. When we discussed with Ambassador Arthur then, they opened this space up and they gave civil society 4 slots to sit on this committee. The committee that runs the show on UPR and the NAP processes. And those 4 slots are still existent. And probably when the coalition reorganizes the stakeholders forum, they will have to fill those positions because they were supposed to serve for 2 terms and then we get other organizations. But currently, I'm keeping hold those positions such that they're not taken from us. I've been attending a couple of meetings there and reverting to some of you as well. So this space is very key. And even if they're not saying particularly that you guys are HRDs, but the fact that they give you space on what is supposed to be closed, we thought that this is a very progressive initiative by the state. Because it's not common in other countries, Eritrea, Ethiopia, you cannot sit with a minister or an ambassador and actually take him on and disagree on things like we were doing in the Interministerial Committee. This Interministerial Committee also discusses every recommendation and determines whether to accept them. And they would call us to have a discussion. And we would, rebut their agenda of just noting the recommendation or simply just trashing it. And we had some wins and some gains. So we thought that this was implicitly important to point out on the same. Some of you have also been involved implicitly, actually explicitly, in the works of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Gender, Labor and Social Development, particularly when it comes to reporting. Some of you have seen you in the current reporting mechanisms of the state under the CAT, under the ICCPR that have been recently completed with the help of the UN Office for Human Rights, inviting members to partake into this process. Like we said, an example that is ongoing is that of compiling the state report to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, where MOJICA as well as MOFA have been providing the civil society with draft reports to input. Now, you cannot wish away this as a good progression when it comes to implementing, recognizing the works of the HRDs. Of course, in some situations, the government has been inviting, or us as civil society inviting. Our conclusion on this matter, therefore, was the above examples speak to the implicit, at least the way the state continues to recognize the legitimacy of HRDs by involving them in human rights initiatives around the country. This legitimacy and recognition was cemented in 2008 with the appointment of a CSO representative on the National NGO Bureau, which further imputes recognition on the works of the HRDs. Of course, there could be a debate of who that was and how she came to be, but you also know that there's no way the NGO Bureau was going to congregate 10,000 people to make a decision on who to go there. But the person there continues to represent us, I think, in a very interesting way. Just two quotations. One of the people we talked with in Masaka, discussed to us the implicit acceptance at district level, but with indifference at sub-county level. And when you go into the district level, you're going into the typical machinery of intelligence gathering. The typical machinery of the DSOs, sometimes imbibed with the arrogance of the RDCs heading the security committees, and sometimes, if you're not lucky, actually complemented by the very aggressive and militant nature of the GISOs. Okay? So there was that issue that at the district where there is some sanity when it comes to the district leadership, the same does not obtain at sub-county level. In particular, in Masaka, for example, one of the respondents was very clear that they were working with the police repeatedly to share human rights initiatives and exchange issues to do with airtime and so forth and so forth. From Soroti, also another interesting person, or HRDs, told us there was resistance from the GISOs. GISO are Gombolola internal security organizations. It's the next, because it's the next to the district level in a way. And they are accustomed to showing power, might, and influence. And they can stop any event hiding under the ambiguous agenda of national security. Most of these are ex-servicemen in the military, while others are reserves within the security apparatus. The continued securitization of meetings that are supposed to be of actually no effect. We've got situations when we're doing this where the word national security is just mentioned and the person is not supposed to explain what national security, but he says because of national security this meeting must stop. And then you say which national security, and he keeps insisting that that is classified information. The issue is it is national security. The ambiguity of just flashing around that word, and then everyone is supposed to cow down to it, was a very prominent in the Gombolola level and of course the parishes. We were also told that they are FISOs. I don't know how far true that is. Probably the media will inform us on that. FISO, Family Internal Security Officer, people who spy on families. I understand that could be your wife or your husband or whatever. FISOs, we want to find out how that is. And then of course we talked about that what is emerging, and I think it needs a discussion later on, even when UPR 3 takes on the securitization of civic space, where any organization it can be dubbed a security threat, where any meeting can be dubbed a national security threat, which first we call securitization of civic space, and we think it is important for this discussion to go beyond just this report on how security is being reshaped to actually reorganize power relations between the citizen and the state. And then there was lack of appreciation of the work of HRDs and resistance to them, according them the rights they deserve. We attributed this sometimes to knowledge and the capacity of the leaders, especially at the decentralization level, and how there is still that lack of knowledge by some of these officers, especially in reserve or those that are retired but are serving as RDCs. They are yet to appreciate the reality or the importance of civil society, or particularly the HRDs. In some districts, we found that they are branded as opposition, especially when they are following up corruption cases. They witch hunt and threaten you with imprisonment, arbitrary arrest, among others. Usually you receive threatening calls and you're forced to apologize for your statements. Particularly those civil society organizations or HRDs. I mean, Zoka here is a very particular example. When you're pursuing no-go zone areas that are called, we're told by some HRDs, that are called wet spaces. Wet in the context that there's a lot of money flowing from those conduits. Maybe procurement unit at the district level. You would have to be thoroughly pursued or spied on or followed because you're following up such entities. And then, of course, this is the other recommendation on operating environment. We have finished that of legitimacy, and we see progress in that context of recognizing legitimacy, and we dubbed it as partially implemented. Now, when we go to the, probably the last one is a recommendation on operating environment, harassment, and intimidation of HRDs. We lumped all the others together because it was the same thing. From Ireland, from whatever, they were almost the same. Now, here is where the trouble is, and where there is almost no implementation at all. Particularly when we begin with the HRDs under the media, we recognized that the state is having a problem of dealing with this new media. The new media that we found in the field is the journalism, what scholars call the journalism of engagement. And this one demystifies the role of the reporter from being a passive observer of human rights violation, but has a duty-bound, morally obligated actor. So this new form of journalism that has emerged is taking advantage of the new technology. Anyone with a phone can capture something and relay it, like we used to get information from Zoka repeatedly on the felling of those trees. Now, this new journalist is increasingly going beyond narrative of events, but he's also engaging in advocacy. And this new journalist is a threat, as we discovered in the field. It appears the state wanted a journalist of the past, record events and chill and move on. But this new journalist does not only record events, but even asks questions that appear to the state or state paraphernalia as going beyond their work and as being sort of oppositional in nature. But this new journalist actually is needed for where we are at. And we found that there is an intersectionality between the violations that the media suffered in 2018 and the new levels of advocacy that they have upped themselves to. In 2008, which is essentially what we're looking at in terms of midterm, there were over 163 violations that were targeted towards the media, particularly the HRDs conceptualized as media. And these violations were enormous in terms of diversity, covering assaults, malicious damage to equipment, that is cameras, confiscation of gadgets, arbitrary arrests and detentions, media station shutdowns, and ban, among others, which all of them were perpetrated by the state agents and agencies, and sometimes people connected to the two that I've talked about. There were also cases of increasing charges of criminal libel. Many of you know that we still retain criminal defamation and libel in our laws, even if it is under challenge at the East African Court of Justice. In 2018, over 7 journalists were charged with criminal libel and offensive communication for stories that they had written that are critical of government officials. The problem with criminal libel and criminal defamation is that even if you're making a point, even if you're following up a corruption issue, an accountability issue, there's a thin line between you doing that story and the person you are writing about pleading defamation. And most of these government officials have found shelter in criminal defamation and criminal libel to actually stop the work of investigative and accountability-oriented journalism. That law still obtains, but it's under attack, like I said, in the East African Court of Justice, where the arguments are now done. We are waiting for the judgments. So most people there are forced to reveal sources, as was the case. Many of you remember the Bank of Uganda saga. An issue that we found is infringing on the rights of HRDs, particularly the media. There are also laws that still remain a problem. For example, Section 38 of the Press and Journalist Act, much as it protects the source of information, there was compulsion. And we thought that it needs to even be reformed further, such that it is a mandatory requirement that you cannot force one to reveal his sources. So in 2018, some journalists were forced to actually reveal sources. Over 45 journalists were either arrested maliciously or arbitrarily and detained without charge while executing their duties. In the process of the fracas of the arrest, most of the working tools of journalists were damaged, and some instances confiscated, some instances not even returned, and some instances returned but with damage. We had 7 cases that we discovered that were ongoing in that year, or were recorded that year. Interestingly, the main perpetrators of this malicious damage to property were mainly the military, the police, and a negligible number of civilians. Majority of these damages, like I said, they occurred during the arrests when security agencies seek to bar journalists from either covering demonstrations or protests, something that we're not seeing it ending anytime soon. It follows, therefore, in our assessment, that the damage of the workman tools of journalists is not accidental, but partly aims at incapacitating them from relaying news, often of public disorder, as they happen, and as they capture security agencies' conduct during this time. We thought, or we reached a conclusion from the people we talked to, that this seemed to be a deliberate agenda to stop them. There are also a number of assaults, over 27 incidents of assaults of journalists in 2018, again perpetrated by security agencies, this time around including the Special Forces Group, military police, and the Uganda Police Force. But all of them were occurring in politically charged situations. Politically charged, you could also say intense, in terms of the situation that was obtaining at the time. And we also put in the report, as you'll see, some particular names and the media houses where they work from. There were also death threats against journalists. 12 cases were reported of these death threats. This happened largely in Masaka, where 12 journalists were typed out on a piece of paper, and each was accused or was given a reason as to why he should die. There was a name and the reason why he was going to be killed. And this paper was thrown at the CBS offices in Masaka. And almost 8 of them, the justification for the potential assassination was that they are poking their noses where they don't belong. And later on, when we interacted with some of them, they were indeed investigating stories of accountability, of corruption, of abuse of power, which led us to make a conclusion that actually HRDs working in such sensitivities were more prone to these violations. We are thankful to God that these killings have not been executed yet, but of course, the journalists, half of those we talked to stopped the stories they were carrying on. to make a sense of whether it is those stories that were exposing them or it was something else. And then on the question of, excuse me, some of the journalists were accused of spying for the police and passing on sensitive information to security agencies generally, and that was one of the issues that arose when we asked other journalists on why, for them, they were not on the list, while some of theirs were on the list. The threats also included the use of poison, if it comes through. Some of the people who were threatened include Tomsang, Kainja, Kalanzi, Jamil, Malejon, among others, most of them coming from the central region, particularly in Masaka, in Sobuja, including a leader of NTV. So the essence of these threats is that even if they're not executed, the impact is instant, that you'll have to desist from doing the investigative work you've been doing, or you will scale down on what potentially can put you in trouble. What's the end result? Reduced flow of information to the public, because the media fraternity will most times recoil into comfort and non-contentious zones of entertainment. News, less controversial, politically safe, shallow reporting. Politically safe, shallow reporting. That explains why you look, if you really do an assessment of the media today, and you look at the editorial policies, they would want us to discuss, non-contentious things, and politically sensitive things, typical social life issues. The effect has a beginning. The beginning are those threats. Then some radios were shut down on orders of RDCs and the Uganda Communications Commission without following any duly laid down legal procedures. This happened in Lira and in Lango sub-region, particularly Unity FM. The radio was accused of inciting violence. Many of you heard about that story in Lira, which involved the Asian, Ugandans of Asian origin, or Asians of Ugandan origin. I don't know how it goes, but there was a big scuffle there in Lira, and some of the radios were shut down as Lira almost went to fire over the protestations of discrimination and some racial slaves that were uttered there. Then, of course, we have the RDCs on the heels of HRIDs. They re-emerged in this period under review with a new face of arbitrary power against journalists, especially those that operate at the local level. Most of the arrests that happened, or those that we talked to, they were really under the orders of the RDCs as the heads of the District Security Committee. So the argument was simple. They simply brand you, a journalist, as a security threat. And then they go and talk to the media houses, and then either the media house drops you or reassigns you to other stories, like of celebrities who beat each other, who cheated on who, and so forth and so forth. And you leave that potentially controversial bits. They put you on Spark, Sabula, those things, and then you Sabula from there. Then, of course, coupled with above is the overreach power of the UCC that all of us, particularly in this room, have an inkling, an idea of now how powerful UCC is. How powerful UCC is, how out of reach its power is now out of reach, and we saw that when we were doing this analysis of these findings, particularly. Again, towards journalists in the same. And then, of course, in 2018, photojournalists were blocked from accessing news sites. By design, a journalist as an HRD is only useful in as far as it can access a news site to get news from there. So when you block him or her, you're actually disarming them from doing their work. Other notable incidents that had an effect on this operating environment of HRIDs relate to the introduction of the social media tax, OTT. Why? Because it is a mechanism of relaying violence as it happens, or violations as they happen. In addition to the above, were also internet restrictions, picking from Tanzania. Those of you who are following Tanzania, you know that it is getting there every day in Tanzania. And particularly the attack on the media there, and their UCC there, or their TCC there. Ours is, you can't even compare them. This is not to equip you with what you're going to say, James, when you stand here and say Tanzania is worse, but it's simply to make a comparative. Of course, we saw the so-called strict rules of publications online. Again, we are following it up. You're seeing people being asked to get a license if they have followership of over 1,000 people or so, which we think is an infringement on freedom of expression. Interestingly, some of the things that we found in 2019, as at the time that they were on the start, they have actually been actualized in 2020, and some of they're coming off as even more powerful than they were at the time when we did this research. A particularly important point that continues to linger around are the break-ins into civil society or NGO offices. They remain unresolved, and at the time, the attacks targeted information holding and documentation facilities. 3 years later or 4 years later, this issue has not been resolved. When we had an HRD, again, it was organized by the coalition, I think, in Africana, we had got clarity from the police that they would be telling us and releasing that report very soon, but that report has not yet come out. I'm glad that the police is here, probably they will substantiate on that. So as per now, even at the time of ending this research, there was no concrete reason or information on why the NGO offices in the country, across the country, were being broken into, and why actually the target was always information holding gadgets at the time. We still hold to see this, but of course you know what that means. Some organizations again retreated into non-contentious issues to avoid being on what people called a hit list. Of course, there was a communique from the IGP then, which we thought was very progressive, directing officers on human rights violations. Remember, this was at the time when the Human Rights Enforcement Act came into being. The IGP, very rare in this country, the IGP signing a note verbal to all officers, warning them that a new law, behold, is here, and it is coming for you individually. And it went, be informed that a new law, the Uganda Human Rights Enforcement Act, is now in place. Going forward, the entrenchment of human rights in police work will never be an option. Very strong language coming from the IGP, a complete departure from the former. That point is also made. So we thought that that was a very progressive move. To enhance accountability for human rights violations, Section 10 of the new Human Rights Enforcement Act holds public officers like police officers individually liable for violations of a person's rights or freedom committed either individually or in a group. You realize, comrades, that this law has been so much in full swing, with private prosecutions coming in and, at a fast rate. In my other caption, where I chair a civil and political working group under the Network for Public Interest Lawyers, we have, I think, since the law came out, launched over 7 private prosecutions using this law. Of course, on all occasions, the DPP has taken them up. And when we met her, we had a different conversation with her because we saw this as frustrating, actually, the implementation of this law. But that is one of the progressions that we note, that the police comes out and actually acquiesces and says this law is here to help us. That was on the recommendations of intimidation, harassment, and we conclude on that there's only been partial implementation. Why partial implementation? Because some of the cases, particularly of police officers who are going rogue, are being dealt with by the Professional Standards Unit. But you also know, just like I know, that the Professional Standards Unit treats those as simply indiscipline cases, not as crimes or offenses punishable under the Penal Code or under the laws like the Domestic Violence Act, the Anti-Torture Act, and so forth. In essence, much as there is work by a PSU, that work is not deterrent enough. Because even the punishment PSU recommends, most of the time, is administrative. And also, as probably James would explain, the PSU is not too much of a court, but recommends to the court of police. So the dilemma in accountability becomes very manifest and vivid for all to see. However, we don't and we cannot fail to recognize at least that there was some work by the PSU and, of course, the IGP for some situations. The last recommendation is on assembly and association. And here, UK and Northern Ireland noted that it is important to consult a broad range of civil society actors and reflect their views in the Non-Government Organizations Act 2016 to ensure an open, accountable, and vibrant NGO sector. As it stands currently, Uganda has maintained that act in its form, despite the various efforts we have put up by the civil society and the HRD fraternity to advocate for the removal of some sections. So the sector remains under siege, particularly of those substantive administrative encumbrances of the NGO law. Particularly when you look at the district level, some of you who come at that from that level, who do work from that level, you know you are under constant surveillance by the DISO and by the GISO, and they even have power to recommend to recommend the invocation of your certificates. In a way, the work of HRDs, especially at the district level, is at the mercy of these individuals who, in one way or another, most of the time untouchable in a way. So that remains a problem, and there has been actually no implementation of that reality as we go on. Particularly when you look at section 44 of that act, prohibits NGOs from carrying out activities in any part of the country unless they have received certification from the district non-governmental monitoring committee. Okay, it doesn't matter how good your idea is, but you cannot just simply enter a district and make implementation happen without this certification. It means that they can actually reject whatever you from people. The fact that these had become conduits of extortion and bribery. That when you want to do some work and the GISO in charge, the GISO is in charge and is proving to be not for you, most of the time there were reports of the fact that they would ask you to facilitate your certification in a special way. And when you're told to facilitate your certification in a special way, you know that you have to undergo pocket transformation to pay something. We have talked about the surveillance question at the sub-county level and so forth. So that law remains as it is. And of course, the section 44, the special obligation section, which we are challenging, as you well are aware, is in the Constitutional Court, but they are yet to give us a particular date to hear that reality. There was a very interesting problem with HRIDs and oil governance, a lot of intimidation. Usually, calls coming in from strange people warning the HRIDs in the Albertine region to desist from doing some things or to do some things which were in contradiction of what they're supposed to be doing. And apparently, shall leave that for another day. Then there was also the continuance, despite the recommendation, there is continuance, or Uganda continues to keep draconian laws inhibiting freedom of expression and online activism, particularly the Computer Misuse Act of 2011. We have all seen what Stella Nyanzi went through. It's one thing when you don't agree with her language. It's another thing to recognize that she had to say what she had to say, and she had a right to say it. And it's also another thing to recognize that probably if you said something different, but it's not a very welcome a statement in someone's ears, you may have to undergo the same, particularly section 24 and 25. These are also under challenge today, currently in the Constitutional Court by a number of HRD organizations, but they continue to be used spontaneously. Cyber harassment, yes, the same thing of cyber harassment and so forth. We have talked about the HRD break-ins that have not been resolved. As of June 2019, there were 33 cases in the country of NGO break-ins. 33 pending investigation and completion. None has been completed. In fact, in some, the police had the audacity, through the spokesperson of Kampala Extra, that it was NGOs feigning and faking these break-ins to attract money. Of course, when he was put to strict proof thereof, he could only say he was speculating what he was saying. But we have 33 cases, none investigated to completion. Again, some of those cases include Hurinate, FAWE, HIRAF, HRNJ, Anti-Corruption Coalition, Uganda Land Alliance, Action Group for Health, Lira NGO Forum, among many others. Of course, we cannot turn a deaf ear and eye to this, because it has a connotation on how the civil society organizations, HRDs, will normally recoil. Okay, so while with the perpetrators still at large, the operating environment of the HRDs, NGOs remains unsafe, because fear looms over with anticipation of what organization is going to be next. One particular denominator in all of these broken into agencies is that all of them, majority of them, have a history of operating in advocacy around good governance, human rights, anti-corruption campaigns, seeking accountability. None was broken into when it is dealing in children's rights. Okay? None was broken into when it's discussing food rights. No. The particular agenda or denominator was particularly this entity, which in absence of investigations, we will leave no, I mean, you're free to speculate potentially that is it the work we are doing? Is it our identity that is causing that? Or it is simply crime? And the question remains at large. In our conclusion, we find that this implementation has not been dealt with at all, save from the usual connotations of we are working on that, we are investigating, and so forth and so forth. I will end with the Women Human Rights Defenders Operating Framework. Now, all the other things we have talked about, the media and so forth, there's a particular part of women HRDs, for example, in media. And we discovered from the findings that they are treated differently. They are sexualized, okay? The connotations and the innuendos of sexism, of objectivizing them and their bodies, lay bare, especially for women HRDs in the journalism industry. There were talks of them being molested or groped, or when they go to report cases at police, when they are repeatedly told that why don't you leave such a profession and join the non-men's world, something that is not as aggressive as, for example, investigative journalism, which goes to the core of the unfinished liberation of the minds of some of the people in power when it comes to the human being called a woman. This gender aspect also came in when it comes to land cases or land rights for women. Those organizations that are working towards ensuring justice for women, they are normally, those women in such organizations, they were called rebel women because they're standing up to patriarchal cultural settings that continue to accentuate the subjugation of women. So we concluded that it all has to do with a very patriarchal society that is also normalizing these attacks on women, HRDs. There were recommendations where the government has done nothing. We shall not even spend time on them. These recommendations include one from Congo. Ladies and gentlemen, Congo also gave us a recommendation, DRC Congo. It recommended to Uganda to enhance ratification of international human rights instruments. And then Syrian Republic, Arab Republic, told Uganda to continue to consider ratification of more international human rights instruments. And then Azerbaijan, which recently was ranked as one of the most authoritarian countries, also recommended to us to continue ascending to the core international human rights instruments. Denmark told us to adopt the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture regulations to make the Prevention and Prohibition of Torture Act operational. Congo, I've talked about Congo, it's a repeat. Now, as of 2018, out of the 56 international human rights instruments, Uganda had only signed 25, ratified 18, and ascended to 15. You'll see it in the annex of the report when you see it. Additionally, 7 were signed but have not been ratified, while on the remnant 16, no action has been taken. As such, up to date, Uganda must ratify 23 other international and regional human rights instruments. But there was some progress, very interesting progress, done by the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Justice. There was a study, which some of you took part in, I see of you, which was undertaken by Ambassador Juliet Kalema, and she was supposed to consult civil society and government agencies on what urgent instruments, regional and international, should be ratified by the state. The study was part of a project, or is still part of the project under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is aimed at ratification and domestication of regional and international human rights standards. Those of you who sit in the JELOS meetings, you know this has been a very, very strategic project, and there are talks, actually. They have forwarded some of these recommendations of the instruments for ratification by the state, owing to Ambassador Juliet's study. In that analysis that Ambassador Juliet made, the prioritized 15 instruments that the government is going to take on is the 3rd optional protocol on the Convention of the Rights of a Child on the communication procedure, the Hague Convention on protection of children and cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption. Many of you have begun seeing action here. Then the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. Then the ILO Domestic Workers Convention, number 189 of 2011. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. Optional protocol to the ICCP, to the ICESR. And then the second optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The second optional protocol, ICCPR, is about the mechanism, the reporting mechanism. And then the AU protocol, among others, as you see in the report. The government is working on these for implementation. At the time of writing this report, however, there was no process leading to the ratification of OPCAT 2. meaning that HRDs cannot approach the Committee for Complaints of Human Rights Violations, much as it is on their agenda in terms of the study released by Ambassador Juliet. The last part is looking at the challenges. Much as we have seen those impartial and partial implementation and so forth in those recommendations, we discovered some of the challenges include lack of capacity in the ratification process. Under the ministry, you know, those of you who have been in this game for long, that the Ministry of Gender and Labor and Social Development is actually bombarded with over 15 instruments for reporting, and yet they do not have enough capacity, both in terms of number, but also even in terms of skill and knowledge on how to go about it. We think that there could be some advocacy around here to let some of either the increase the number of people dealing on that docket, or they could even spread them out to the different ministries that are supposed to do all that. The last part was from Ghana, saying that we should investigate acts of torture, hold the state accountable. Denmark, ensure the police force, the Director of Public Prosecution and the Human Rights Commission investigate all alleged allegations of torture. Then Portugal, also the same thing on torture. Ireland also had a recommendation on torture. Switzerland had the same in practice, first to implement the act on torture. The status currently, there is no ratification of the OPCAT, because you realize all of those recommendations have a connotation on the OPCAT. If we ratify the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, it means that HRDs can go direct and report these cases. If we don't ratify, they can't go direct. So the dilemma is in the fact that the country or the state has not yet ratified that. Progress, we have an act in place. We have the regulations in place. I think Mr. Nsubga is really more knowledgeable on this. These are regulations in place. The government of Uganda is also implementing the personal liability principle as a component of the compensation policy for the survivors of torture. We saw what the IGP was saying. Then there was also the closure of Nalufenya police station cells. You remember at the time when we did the UPR2, Nalufenya was the most talked about as the center of evil, as the concentration of torture. But it was closed, and now it is a fully fledged police station. When it comes to torture, there's still limited awareness among both state and non-state actors as one of the challenge. And then the last challenge is on the inadequate capacities in reporting, investigating, documenting of torture, aspects which are very necessary when it comes to prosecution of torture. And then we think that the PSU of the Uganda Police Force, much as it is doing some work, but as we said, it continues treating this as indiscipline and not crimes. So the deterrence is limited. And then, of course, our laws have demeaned, especially the penal code, has downgraded what would have been torture to simply assault. Or it is not yet elevated that, and we have a problem with the fact that they are not prosecuting it as torture. Essentially, therefore, it means that the torture or allegations are treated as simply indiscipline, as we have talked about in that. I want to go to the I want to complete this thing in 2 minutes. Now, there were recommendations that were very interesting on what we call special procedures. Normally, the country must give an open invitation to a particular special procedure mandate holder, special rapporteur, to come into the country. Now, Georgia wants Uganda to extend, or wanted Uganda to extend a standing invitation to special procedure mandates. Ghana wanted the same thing for us. Guatemala, the same thing. Republic of Korea, the same thing. Panama, the same thing. Rwanda, the same. Ukraine, the same. Meanwhile, Rwanda has not even sent to anyone. But they wanted us to have a standing invitation to special procedures. And then Azerbaijan also wanted us to continue constructive cooperation with the United Nations Human Rights Mechanism. Like we said, a standing invitation is an open invitation extended by the government. You come and check me. Now, according to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as of 15th July 2019, there are 121 member states and 1 non-member observer states that have extended an invitation to special procedures. Uganda has not done that. When we reached out to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, this is what they say. It needs to be flagged off by the cabinet, which is responsible to determine which particular mandate holder can visit Uganda, depending on need. For now, Uganda is still on its human rights promotion and protection course of action, buttressed by a functional Uganda Human Rights Commission. I think you can hear the word, buttressed by a functional Uganda Human Rights Commission, and the availability of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, in addition to so many other UN agencies operating in the country, all with technical capacity to offer. We quoted it verbatim from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Uganda has not extended any single standing invitation since 2004 to any special mechanism. Of course, by the time we were telling our comrades, and I think the new leaders of the coalition will pursue this, what we had strategized was to begin inviting these special rapporteurs in for academic debates. For example, Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, he comes in and is hosted by civil society and he makes his case. Because there is no law that bars them from actually coming on the invitation of civil society or anything. I see, James, you have noted that. I don't know whether to frustrate it or to... Okay. So the recommendations of the study. We think that we should expedite the National Action Plan. Why? For completion, because it's a beautiful document. I've had the privilege to look at it. It's a very, very comprehensive document, and I understand it was even costed. We think it could be a very interesting vehicle to implement the UPR recommendations. The need to translate the Constitution into local languages as directed by the Constitution. Why? For conscientization of the public, which we discovered is very key. Then the capacity of HRDs on collaborating with government. Because indeed in the field we discovered that there is sometimes lack of diplomacy from our side. We are too aggressive, we are too confrontational. It's like we are God appointed to cause change immediately. Yet we also saw results, particularly UPR, by the way, is the case study. The kind of cooperation we had with the government agencies to pull off over 25 reports submitted. For even, let me tell you, for even the Minister of Foreign Affairs to call civil society and ask if we had challenges of visa. And if we had challenges of visa, to put our names on their list. All not for compromise, but because we had reached a consensus that this is wrong, this is how we rectify it, this is right, to bring that synergy of complementarity and working together. We think that the capacity of understanding how government works and actually dealing with them as they work is very important in the move of HRD work, because sometimes we may think we know how it works, but when actually we are lacking some things. We have picked a couple of lessons in attending these small meetings of the Interministerial Committee and so forth on how some of our comrades there work. And it is their work ethic. You can't turn it around in a minute, but then you can try to fit in and cause some change therein. We need to strengthen the existing linkages and coordination platforms of various regional HRDs to enhance information flow and sharing, the network agenda and how robust it can be. Then the capacity of HRDs in documenting is lacking. Documenting. Jackie and myself, we know what we went through when we were asking for reports going to the UPR. We received around 18 reports. Some of them was Wikipedia. Someone goes to Wikipedia and copies something and puts it to you, bam. Okay? Or goes to a newspaper, picks the entire story, and puts it in the report. And then he writes, submitted to the steering committee. And then even has the audacity to call you, James, have you received my report? Which report? But for purposes of just encouraging people, you say we have received it, we are trying to rectify a few things, but thank you, you know. But the reality of documentation goes beyond copy and paste. Okay, especially when we are writing to the UN, you want credible information. You know, you want to have a conversation with the state on something that is true, that is factual, not something, you know, thought about, you can't follow up, you have no way to really ascertain, and so forth. So I think going forward, even in rejuvenating the National Stakeholders Forum, there is a thorough need for training on documenting, yes, monitoring, people are doing, but then documenting and reporting, which I think is very important to be done. And then, of course, lastly, a particular training module targeting human rights defenders at the grassroots. Some of them are doing great work, but they have no support structure. You know, at the grassroots. By grassroots, we mean the CBOs. Sometimes the target is the NGOs and so forth, but then there's a lot of work being done by some of our comrades at the level of district which need to be recognized. And then they need, lastly, to reorient the leadership of various levels at the district on the import of the constitutional Article 38. You know? And even some organizations here, or some of you here, you may not know, but normally the mantra with government is civil society. Who are you? Who voted you? Article 38 of the Constitution is very clear that Ugandans have a right to take part in the governance of their country through civic organizations. In fact, unknown to some people who harass us, the NGO Act is the operationalization of Article 38. In essence, NGOs or HRDs, they are a constitutional establishment. Why? Because they are drawn and invoked by Article 38. So, comrades, be encouraged. We are not on our own frolic, as some members of government may want us to think or know. We are actually an establishment under Article 38. And the only way to do it with NGOs or HRDs is to amend Article 38, albeit in a participatory manner. I want to end here. Thank you. It's taken long, but we wanted you to have a piece of it. Thank you, Edward.
I mean, if you say we are not on our own frolic gems, invoking Article 38. So I think James deserves another hand clap. What he has presented really is what we got from you, your voices, and also the interactions with the state actors. But there are some issues that he raised, and colleagues from the Uganda Police Force and the UPDF would want to make a comment. The comments will not change the report, but will inform future conversations. So I would like to ask Prosi to give the microphone to Mr. James Semerero to respond to some of the issues that were raised. James, you can come here.
Thank you, Edward. Good morning, everyone. All protocol observed. For those of you who may not know me, I'm called Assistant Commissioner of Police, Kusemererwa James. I head the Department of Human Rights under the Directorate of Human Rights and Legal Services in the Uganda Police Force. Most of you are familiar, and we are really talking about familiar issues that we usually talk about, and which is a good thing anyway. It's not until we talk about some of these issues, we may not be in a position to resolve them. Because others come and they take our mind, and the constant reminder and the constant talking about them forces us, if we are sleeping, to take action. So I applaud whatever issues that come in, the criticisms, they are positive. About the UPR issue that we are discussing today, it's good. We've been recognized that we have been a very big part of this, because most of the issues, most times, touch us a lot, and we are required to give a lot of information. So we have been part of this process, and I hope we have made some contribution. But again, I also want to take this opportunity to remind the Ugandans that UPF still remains committed to the protection of the human rights of the people and the citizens of this country. Why? I always joke with members here. It's not actually a joke. For me, I take it seriously, that UPF is the #1 human rights defender. Our mandate really is all about protection of people's rights. So we may have some flaws in the implementation of that mandate, but does not take that away from us. So we are together in this. So we have two legs. We are duty bearers, but at the same time, we are also human rights defenders. So it is important to take note of that, that in whatever we are doing, we are with you. How we do it may be another issue. You may be satisfied with the way we deliver it or not, but of course, it's because of the various challenges that we may meet at times which are beyond our control. Today I came here, I didn't expect to give a speech, by the way. I thought I would come and also relax and enjoy and follow proceedings, but here I am. So I was following up James's report presentation, so I may not have all these answers today, but I'll point up on a few issues here and there, just to put them into perspective. So like we said, we are committed really to enforce the rights of the people. But before even we come to the people, we have taken various actions internally. Okay? He has talked about the circulars. It's not even one circular, by the way. There are various circulars, including those ones holding officers individually accountable. Recently, we were having a conversation and realized that probably we are doing a lot internally, but we are not accounting enough to the public. So it leaves gray areas, and people think we are doing nothing about certain issues. So going forward, we are trying to push something. So probably we may include it in our coming annual crime reports on what action we have taken, both disciplinarily and criminally, on officers who may have infringed on the people's rights. I think that may help at least to, to answer some of the queries, because it seems we are not bringing that one out very well. James talked about the issue of PSU. I think we need to understand it very well. PSU, as the name is, Professional Standards Unit. So when you have issues with the way we are doing our work, you may bring them in as the people outside that we serve, but also as internally what we observe. If officers are doing their work unprofessionally, we refer them for investigation at PSU. But not every issue that is reported at PSU is concluded by PSU. PSU is guided that once they detect that something is of a criminal nature, they have to hand it over to CID. I want us to get that clearly. Not every complaint, not every issue that goes to PSU is necessarily concluded by PSU. Once a criminal element is detected in a particular complaint referred to PSU, it is PSU has to, to look through, and if they think there is evidence of a criminal nature, they have to revert it to CID to take it through the normal channels. So I think that's very important. And of course, there are issues which have been raised around break-ins and the like. So when we are reporting at these levels, police will do our part. Probably now the issue would be, since it always comes back to police, we need to fast track with other departments which have to ultimately air out this information to the public. So I think that is an assignment given to me, which I have to take back home, because every time we have had these sittings, it comes to us. And at some point we pledged that, oh, we are bringing out this information sooner than later. But you see, these documents pass through processes and they are reported at a certain level. So we need to fast track it where it is stuck so that we can have it resolved once and for all. What am I asking of the people gathered here today? Okay, before I even reach there, there was, James insisted on the issue of journalists, and I'm glad we're here with the brothers and sisters. So I want to ask a question. Who's a journalist? And what are the ethics of journalism? Because it's very important. When you're reporting on something, because we have had challenges, and that's why now we are being also forced that as the journalist is recording incidents, if it is a riot or a demonstration, when the journalist is covering, we should also be able to be in position to also to cover the same event. Because we have had situations at times when there is sensationalism, the journalist moves away from his ethical code and also moves with the bandwagon of the time for intentions at times that are not understood. So the story is not complete. So someone picks out just a certain caption of the proceedings, and what is reported at the end of the day does not tell the full story. So I implore all of us here who are here, so when we are doing our work, let's be as professional as possible, and we tell the full story. Where there are mistakes, where there are issues that have arisen, they'll be addressed when the full story is told, because what I want to assure people here, we do not condone impunity. That's why I still refer to the other circular James talked about of the IGP, where he said, going forward, in calculating human rights in our operations will no longer be an option. What message is he trying to send in there? That as you go about your work, try to follow all the principles that are required of you during handling of an operation. You recall that also sometime last year, maybe James did, okay, maybe he may have recorded his report earlier than the time when we launched the human rights policy. I'm glad Rosalind is here, Karugonjo. She was our consultant when we were, coming up with that policy. Most of the issues that are being raised here, we have included them in that policy. Going forward, we are working on issues of dissemination. At least every police officer going forward should get a copy of that document so that it guides them when they are handling any operation, any police work. So we are not sleeping. So I would have been glad if it had been captured, but Edward has told us the report is remaining the way it is as of now. It will not change anything, but I thought I can talk about that. I want to conclude by saying and rallying everyone here that Uganda is here to stay. It is ours. We need to work together. Where there are issues, let's not be frustrated. Where you cannot approach a certain office, there is always a window in another office. But I'm very sure many of you have come to my office, for instance, and somehow, somewhere have gotten a solution. It may not have satisfied you fully, but we have reached somewhere. And let's continue, championing this cause of addressing human rights in our country. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. Proceed, could you pass the microphone to Colonel to make one or two comments?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed, as a disciplined force, we are supposed to respect every person in their capacities. So all protocol observed. From the UPDF, I wish to express my appreciation for all efforts that were put in place and eventually culminated into this report. I am Lieutenant Colonel Deo Karikona, and I'm the Director, Human Rights. So you see how this one makes me a partner. James has talked so much about familiar faces, familiar faces. Yes, my face may not be familiar. I'm the new director, so in military terminology, we would say I bring reinforcement to this cause because it is a shared goal, it is a shared responsibility. We take seriously, of course, our obligation to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. It is a constitutional obligation which we take seriously. And I'm here, ladies and gentlemen, to guarantee our commitment as the EPDF, the People's Army, to work together to improve the protection and promotion of the fundamental rights and freedoms. Of course, we are working towards a unified voice in implementing this shared responsibility. During the presentation, some few issues pertinent to the UPDF have been raised. And it is majorly in roles where we are in aid to the police. As a policy, we always say this every time we have an opportunity, we have a zero tolerance policy towards indiscipline. As the People's Army, following a pro-people ideology, we don't condone any violation of human rights. So where we have had transgressions by individuals or groups, we are insisting on the principle of accountability. We do it differently, you know that. We believe in on-scene trials where the people are called and justice is seen to be done. So where there are cases where UPDF has been mentioned for transgressions, we hold them accountable. I wish to inform this meeting that we have two forms of discipline in the Army. We have conscious discipline and we have the mechanical discipline. We have intensified measures of insisting on conscious discipline so that every soldier, every individual does self-policing. And in so doing, we have intensified efforts towards awareness, towards sensitization and assessment. You talked about the Human Rights Enforcement Act. As the Director of Human Rights, I'm so much involved in sensitizing about this law. There is a misconception about what amounts to torture. We are making it clear to the troops that this is what it means. When you do this, you take responsibility. We're even extending it to other people who are not practically involved. We tell them you can be held responsible here for something that is committed in Kachiri. So soldiers are getting it. And I also wish to report to you that as Human Rights Department in the UPDF, we are decentralizing all the services so that it is not only at the headquarters, even a soldier who is down there is able to access. If you have a human rights issue, I have an office where you can go to. And secondly, the intended purpose is for purposes of sensitization and awareness at those lower levels, because human rights does not have exceptions. We are privileged, of course, as James has said. We are constantly guided by the Commander-in-Chief. He should be the greatest human rights defender. He writes to us routinely about issues of human rights. So apart from implementing the law as it is, we also have constant guidance from the Commander-in-Chief. He writes, and you know, as a disciplined force, we take orders very seriously. So we are doing all it takes to ensure that the human rights situation is improved, constitutional obligations are observed, and so that we have a human rights sensitive society. We are also involved in capacity building. We are identifying officers with what we are calling a bias in human rights. A bias in human rights, so that we train them and deploy them so that we have this concerted effort implemented. We shall be pretending if we shall not talk about challenges. They are emerging challenges. Much as we have this constitutional obligation, as all Ugandans you've heard, where in an effort to protect you have also been attacked. So there are challenges which we must recognize. You heard of a soldier who lost an eye while trying to enforce some of these constitutional obligations. You heard of a soldier who sustained a broken arm by the people he's supposed to protect. So ladies and gentlemen, we have challenges. But that one notwithstanding, we are training, we are creating awareness, and we are sure that the situation will improve day by day. James required me to talk about something called the CSO. CSO is a new nomenclature. It is not within what we know. I only hear about DISO, but of course DISO, those are under different department. But I want to assure you that that family CSO thing is not for us. It does not exist. We don't have it, and it does not exist. We have also put in place SOPs, because in most of these operations, you are aware that ordinarily this is not our mandate. So we come in aid to the Uganda Police Force. So to ensure that there is respect for human rights, we are even putting up SOPs for these joint operations. And we are insisting on issues relating to human rights. Torture, we are insisting about the existence of that law. So we have a feeling that once you have an army that is aware, as it is, we shall have a human rights sensitive force. My office is open in Mbuya and in Bombo. Please feel free to come and share with me anything you feel we should have a discussion on. That's why I exist. Otherwise, it is not created just because they wanted to fill a certain post. No, I'm there to serve you. I'm there to serve the institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kano. We're going to receive a quick remark from Dr. Rose Karugonjo, and immediately after we'll move to the last phase of this engagement.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. I'm Roslyn Karugonjo Segawa. I'm the chairperson of the Leadership Code Tribunal. It's a new tribunal. We were sworn in on 24th July 2020, so we are a few months in office. For those who don't know, the mandate stems from Article 235A of the Constitution, and there is an act which and our major mandate is to promote rule of law and accountability for leaders. So basically we hear cases of where leaders have been accused of breaching the leadership code of conduct. I suppose then you're wondering, why am I here? I have a strong human rights history. Many of you may have known me as a Director Monitoring and Inspections at the Uganda Human Rights Commission, which was of course concerned with monitoring government compliance with international obligations. I used to teach human rights. I've also worked as a lead consultant, and I helped our government and civil society to develop the National Action Plan on Human Rights, which James was talking about. I hope that this meeting will take the National Action Plan forward, because it was a lot of effort that went in there, and that if it's actually implemented, it will bring about an improvement in the human rights situation. It was also addressing many of the recommendations that came through. And also for the last UPR report, I provided support again as a consultant to draft the last UPR report. So I have a lot of experience in terms of human rights also. And with the UPF, I helped to draft their human rights policy, which also, if it is implemented well, it can also get rid of some of these things that we are discussing. So I'm just here to say that UPR is an important opportunity. It's an important process. It is a process whereby countries review themselves at that international level and make recommendations for improvement of the human rights situation. As a country, I've seen us improve and grow because it has been an opportunity for dialogue. Similar dialogues are held at interministerial level and human rights issues are discussed. And I believe that if we continue to discuss, and these discussions don't only remain in the boardrooms or don't only remain in the hotels where we are, that the human rights situation will improve. Of course, we would also appeal that the government moves fast. Some of these recommendations have been on for a long time, and they need to move fast. We need to get into why do we have so many good policies which people copy and implement, and for us, it remains on the books. So we do need to take the discussion even further outside the boardrooms, outside this hotel, such that there can be improvements in the human rights situation. But I want to commend the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders for inviting me. I believe you still regard me as one of your own. I regard myself as one of your own. For God and our country, the struggle continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We don't have much time, but I would like to recognize Sarah Virete, Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance. We had Samuel Nsubuga from the African Center for Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. We also have Estera Kabatrezi from Defenders. We also have a representative of IDIWA. IDIWA is a disability women rights organization. We have John Turiachira, a climate change activist. Faith Namansa is Busoga Women Human Rights Defenders Network. Yeah, I think. Then Eric Namangoro from the Human Rights Center. You'll forgive me, bro. Yeah, but you are recognized. Sharon Nakanwanji, you'll join the panel because we are coming to the end of our event. I would like to invite my executive director, Mr. Robert Chirenga, to officially invite Robert Kochani to give his remarks and launch the report.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies. I think mine is a simple task to invite our chief guest, who is none other than Dr. Kochani, a country representative, UN Human Rights Office in Uganda. You're most welcome.
Thank you, Robert. A representative of different government and state institutions here present. The Executive Director of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, dear Robert. Representative from the head of DGF, dear Nicole. Representative from international non-governmental organizations, from the academia, the media, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, good morning. I bring you warm regards from the United Nations Office for Human Rights in Uganda. And it's a pleasure for me to have been invited to be here today with you on the launch of the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders report on the implementation of recommendations of the UPR on human rights defenders by the state of Uganda. I would like to thank the leadership of the coalition and also the management of this hotel for the measures that they have taken to ensure that we comply with COVID-19 measures. I'd like to congratulate you also for your discipline and kindly urge those who are not wearing masks to put them on. I see a couple. yes, we shouldn't take these things for granted. There is a very famous personality who is currently in quarantine for having taken it a bit lightly. And it's important. Nobody should go from here with COVID, or nobody has brought it in, I guess. More seriously, if I may say so, since 2010, when Uganda was preparing for the first review under UPR, civil society organizations have been very actively participating in the 2 reviews that have taken place so far in October 2011 and November 2016, as it has been already relayed here. In both reviews, the schedule reports that were submitted to the Human Rights Council counted with a very significant participation of a diverse range of civil society organizations across the country, which in our view is the strength that has to be further continued. The crucial role of civil society organizations in the engagement with the UPR process has been achieved through joint efforts to elaborate, validate, consolidate, and submit their respective input to the Human Rights Council's working group on UPR. The UN Human Rights Office highly recognizes the key role that the human rights umbrella networks in Uganda have always played since the beginning of these processes in disseminating UPR recommendations and actively contributing to coordinate and bringing together the CSO effort to engage with the UPR mechanism. With no doubt, government also understand and certainly laud your effort, which is evidenced by the presence in this room of representatives from many government institutions. We all agree that when you don't have interest into something, you don't show up. Do you? Good. So, allow me to congratulate the different ministerial institutions that are represented here, and the UPF and the UPDF as well. OECHR Uganda has continuously supported the efforts of the civil society organizations according to the mandate that we have here in Uganda, and also the very modest financial resources, capacities that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, in June 2013, for the first time, the very first time, civil society organizations and network engaged in human rights protection in Uganda and formed the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders. Since then, OECHR has focused mostly on its technical cooperation activities, which were addressed to civil society organizations, to members of the coalition operating both in Kampala, but also at the sub-regional level. In October 2013, of course, most of the things I'll be saying here are known to the organizers of this event, but we also believe that there are outsiders who have arrived whose memory could be refreshed by the fact that I'm putting forth. So, in October 2013, OECHR organized a workshop in Kampala for all regional and thematic delegates of the coalition, and in 2015 and 2016, similar trainings, workshops were also rolled out at the sub-regional level in Mbale, Arua, Mbarara, Gulu, Karamoja, Fort Portal, Hoima, Kabale, and in Kampala again, with the objective of covering all regions of Uganda. Therefore, the UN Human Rights Office in Uganda's engagement equipped more than 300 civil society and human rights defenders, including the current 149 members of the coalition, with knowledge and skills relevant to general human rights concepts, international, regional, and national protection mechanisms, as well as human rights monitoring, reporting, and advocacy. The methodology that was used by UN Human Rights enabled the coalition to strengthen the cohesion among its members, as well as the performance of their roles in supporting and advocating for human rights at the sub-regional and the international levels. Since 2015, the civil society organizations in Uganda has coordinated their work on the UPR under the NGO Stakeholder Forum as a loose coalition of over 350 NGOs, coordinated by the National Steering Committee and disaggregated into 15 thematic clusters. In this framework, based on the country-wide experience and membership achieved by the coalition with support from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, it was selected to lead, coordinate the thematic cluster on the work on human rights defenders. As a result of that, as a result of the civil society coordination by the NGO Stakeholder Forum, the number of NGOs and civil society who submitted reports experienced a significant increase from 27 in 2011 to 54 for the second UPR review in 2016. At this junction, allow me to stress the importance of providing genuine, reliable, and factual information. You are not expected to Google or to go to Wikipedia to grab information when you are on the ground. The main merit of the UPR is to create a forum where state delegates feel comfortable to discuss. Otherwise, the 9 core human rights instruments are there with treaty bodies, with experts, but it was felt that this was too formal because you come as a state delegate and you discuss with an expert. At the UPR, you discuss with your peers. That is why the recommendations do not come from experts, but from your colleagues, from Uruguay, or Benin, or et cetera, et cetera. So the importance of your participation is to provide reports that can challenge what the state will provide. But then if your information is not, that can challenge, if need be, can also corroborate what the state has submitted. But if you do not provide valuable information, then you're missing your role. You're making your role redundant because anybody can go to Wikipedia and look for information. But it's not anyone who can go to Nakapiripirit in the Karamoja region and find out that so and so has happened. So I wish to really underscore the importance of you providing reports that are worth it as civil society organizations. So on 3rd November 2016, Uganda underwent the second UPR review conducted by the Human Rights Council and received 226 recommendations, of which 148 were accepted and 78 noted. In November 2016, immediately after the UPR review, the UN Human Rights Office supported the forum to convene a civil society meeting to disseminate the recommendations, initially accepted by Uganda, with an overwhelming participation of more of 120 civil society organizations from all over the country, which demonstrated, once again, the overwhelming engagement of civil society in Uganda with the UPR process and the interest in following up on recommendations. The other thing that I would like to stress at this junction is the information may not be written. Some is written, other may not be written. As we were discussing the finding of the report we are launching, there was a statement that until now, government has not extended any invitation to any special procedure mandate holder. You see, I am in a position to say that as part of the strategy of the UN Human Rights Office, last year we managed to bring in this country on a different capacity, though, the African Union Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women. She was here in July 2019 in a meeting that we organized. And Mofa was there. It was the then ambassador, tall one who is in Japan now, Arthur. Anyway, the meeting was opened by Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they warmly welcomed her, and she even had informal meetings with them. We also managed as an office to bring the independent expert on albinism, who was here. And as a result of all these steps, which were welcomed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I met the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself earlier this year, and he told me, Mr. Kuchani, tell the independent expert on albinism that she can visit Uganda anytime. But of course, that information is not written in the news, it's with me. So take it as coming from the mouth of the horse. You can write it down. So we believe that starting by a special procedure mandate holder, which is seen not to be, between inverted comma, controversial, maybe we can open up, because most of the problems that we see in the human rights sector are due to the fact that we do not always understand each other. We do not always talk at length to each other to understand. Some believe in this country that an independent expert will come and then release a report that will, but yet that's not the function of the independent expert. That's not the function of the special rapporteurs. They work along the mantra of constructive engagement with state. The last special rapporteur who visited Uganda was in 2007. It was the special rapporteur on the right to health, Mr. Paul Hunt, I remember. And he drafted a very good report with very good recommendations. But there again, when the role of some institutions is not well understood, government tend to fear them, not knowing that these are allies who are actually coming to advise you on way forward. Going forward, and since the adoption of Uganda's outcome report in March 2017, the UN Human Rights Office has continued to support the dissemination of the UPR recommendations, especially through the printing of the clustered recommendations. In 2019, the UHRC, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and OSCHR jointly published a booklet with UPR recommendations from the second UPR review, linking these recommendations to SDGs. When you link a recommendation, government here is fully committed at the SDGs. We even have a secretariat, we have fantastic institutions committed at advancing the SDGs. And Uganda played a very important role in the adoption of the SDGs, because Mr. Kutesa was at the he was then heading the General Assembly. So, if we are able to prove that advancing the SDGs helps advancing some of the recommendations, then naturally should be okay. So that booklet links some of the recommendations to the SDGs, meaning if government will advance on this recommendation, then it will also advance on the SDGs. And when you cluster all that together, reporting becomes also easier, because SDGs have to do with all sectors of human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, while Uganda's next review under the UPR is scheduled for November 2021, the UN Human Rights Office would like once again to recognize the effort made by the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders in tracking and following up on the state's implementation of UPR recommendations since the last review in 2016. The midterm assessment that is being launched today by the National Coalition provides an excellent opportunity to evaluate state progress in implementing the UPR recommendation in Uganda, even though you are focusing on what, between inverted comma, might matter more for you, as you said, but it's a very important step in our view. As Uganda prepares for the third UPR, your role as civil society in this process is critical, and the UN Human Rights Office continues viewing your participation as an integral and crucial element of the UPR process. We will therefore continue to provide you with the maximum support and assistance, both to national authorities and to civil society organizations, in order to support your engagement with the international human rights mechanism, particularly with the UPR mechanism, with a view to improving the human rights of all in Uganda. I thank you all, and I hereby officially launch the midterm assessment of the state progress on the implementation of UPR under the second cycle. I thank you. Pardon?
You're going to stay briefly.
Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
But I can go and have my seat.
Yeah. So we are going to do a very small exercise to just officially launch this report, and then distribute a few copies, and then come to the end of our engagement. So I'll invite the head of office, UN, the head of office, DGF, the Executive Director, Robert Chirenga, to come to the front. Rodney, you'll push it in the middle. Proceed. You're more experienced in these things. I don't know what's happening at the front. Yeah, so I'll ask a representative from the police and UPDF to join us. And Madame Karugonja, Rose. Yeah. So, yeah. So, Prosi, please provide a microphone to the head of office of the UN. And the representative of the LWF, Mr. Paul Olishaba, please come to the front. Paul Olishaba. Prosi, have you gotten the microphone?
Put on your mic, you are talking to the big guy without a mic.
A mic. Yeah. So is there some cutting of a ribbon or something? Huh? Pardon? Huh? Okay. So the head of office, you will sign on the report as you officially launch it. You'll make a declaration to that end.
Okay, I already made it a few minutes ago, but I can reiterate once again that upon your request, I'm very happy to be here and officially launch this very important report, and I wish you all the best for the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll ask each of the dignitaries to sign on the dummy report while observing COVID SOPs. Ladies and gentlemen, while the dignitaries sign, I'll ask my colleague to pass copies of the report to our dear participants. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first tape. Yeah. This is the first step towards the 2021 UPR process, and the critical role of each of the organizations represented here will be crucial. Charles from ABIM. Yeah. So I think we are done with this process. I will ask the dignitaries to take their seats so that we receive a closing remark. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kochani, for launching this report. Like we said, this is a specific thematic report for the HRD cluster. Our assumption would have been that we would have a bigger report that is representative of all the clusters, but there has been a coordination issue. And like my executive director said, on the 8th, we will be having a steering committee meeting to sort of tease out the coordination process and how we move forward, and how we have other organizations within other thematic clusters involved in the process. So this is sort of starting the debate, stimulating the conversation around the 2021 civil society UPR process. Now, I would like to thank you and invite my program manager to give a brief closing remark, and we bring this conversation to an end. Please stick around after the closing remark so that we have a small group photo. Thank you very much.
This mask is not easy. Please bear with me. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. My name is Sharon Nakano-Aji, and I'm the program manager at the National Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Uganda. My task now is very simple: to thank you very much for taking part in this very important engagement. I am really challenged by the quote that President Theodore Roosevelt made mention when he said that it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause. I'd like to thank you for spending yourselves in a worthy cause. The work of human rights is really not straightforward. It's not very easy. There are many processes that we go through, but I'd like to thank you for setting apart your time, your space, your freedom, you know, there are so many things you'd be enjoying and doing, but you have been confined sometimes because we want to accomplish a certain mission and we cannot do it alone, but as a group and as a joint effort. So I thank you very much. I want to thank our sponsors of this project, the Democratic Governance Facility. Thank you very much for all these processes and for funding this project, which is actually, it's been an 18-month grant. It comes to an end in 2 weeks' time, the 15th of October this month. So we are looking forward to a continuous engagement with the DGF. There's so much we've been able to accomplish under the DGF. As you could see, this is one of them. But we have so many grassroots HRDs, human rights defenders out there who come to us and say, you know, I couldn't have proceeded with my work if you hadn't intervened in providing support, because many of them many times are threat, and so we provide protection support in terms of emergency support. So many who didn't even know the coalition have been supported, and they've come out to stand out and do their work at its best. And we have continuously engaged with government stakeholders, including the Chief of Defense Forces. So there's so much that is going on in the background, and we look forward to doing much more and more. But I'd like to recognize that all this would not have been possible if it wasn't the support of the DGF and other entities. And so we want to build on to what we have started. We want these processes to go on. So we look forward to continuous engagement with you, Nicole, and the DGF at large. I'd also like to thank the Office of the UN for all the contributions and the support they have provided to the coalition. And we look forward also, like I've said, to our continuous engagement with you. Our fellow human rights defenders, again, thank you for engaging in this important cause. I wouldn't thank you more. I'd like to thank the consultant who took lead in this process. This is a continuous process. Like Edward has insinuated, we'll be here again on Thursday to follow through and see how do we coordinate this process, how do we come up with a roadmap that will lead to the end of this come next year in October. So thank you very much, our human rights defenders out there. Thank you very much, our consultant. I'd like to thank the Secretariat and all the staff who have been engaged in this process. So I wish you a safe journey back home, and let us continue in the fight. God bless you. Edward, we are going to have a photo. I want to have a group photograph, so please. Edward, I've taken over your role.
You're doing well so far. So, yeah. Thanks for the kind reminder. COVID is real. Yeah, so we are going to come to the front, and Rodney will help me here. Should have. Okay. Please organize the group interview. So, colleagues, please come to the front. We'll organize it somehow. Yeah.